The COVID-19 pandemic began as a health crisis that quickly became an economic crisis.
20.5 million jobs lost. That's a little bit below consensus.
This is the worst payrolls report we've ever seen.
The virus crippled entire industries, leaving millions of people without paychecks. But the devastation has not been distributed equally.
What makes this recession a little bit special is that the shock was so idiosyncratic, was so specialized in only some parts of the economy.
Young people have had their education disrupted, their career plans upended, and their financial prospects diminished.
The people graduating from college into this pandemic, they're really getting hammered.
The sectors that are hiring right now, for the most part, are jobs that pay less.
While economists and policymakers ask, how can we protect this cohort from permanent damage?
Most of life outcomes in terms of wealth, the biggest driver is where you sit at age 23.
I don't think that we're paying enough attention to what it's going to take to make it up to those young people.
It's a twofold challenge: to regain momentum while resetting direction in a new economy. That's what lies ahead for a generation interrupted. I'm Lisa Abramowicz. Welcome to a Bloomberg special report, Generation Interrupted, a look at the catastrophic impact of the 2020 pandemic and recession on young people. Let's make clear, no demographic group has been untouched by this year's physical and economic ravages. Minority communities have suffered disproportionately. Women have lost more jobs than men. But when we break down the fallout by age, the effect on Generation Z, the so-called Zoomers, has been the most severe. In April, as COVID-19 spread and business activity slowed, the overall U.S. unemployment rate shot up by over 10 percentage points in a single month to 14.7%. But for 16 to 19-year-olds, the jobless rate soared over 30%. In July, usually the peak month for youth employment, the jobless rate was nearly double the figure for July 2019. Among those taking notice is Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond President Tom Barkin. In an August speech titled "What Happens to Young Workers," he noted that between February and April, nearly 50% of highly exposed workers ages 16 to 24 lost their jobs, compared to 36% of highly exposed workers aged 25 to 54. He wrote, "Maybe we'll see new entry-level jobs delivering groceries or meals, but I'm doubtful these segments will grow quickly enough to immediately replace the millions of jobs that have been lost." I spoke with Barkin about the situation, and he told me why he is so worried.
Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of conversation about the loss of middle-income jobs in this country. What's actually been happening is there's been a lot of growth at the high end, the technical, cognitive jobs, but there's also been a lot of growth at the low end, these low-income personal contact service jobs. And this virus has gone directly at that segment. It's the personal contact jobs, they're restaurants, they're retailers, they're amusement parks, and those jobs are disproportionately held by hourly people, by part-time people, and importantly, by young folks.
What's the importance of these entry-level jobs for a young worker?
Well, not everyone goes directly to college. There are lots of opportunities for people to get into the workforce, to learn the soft skills about how to show up, how to work with a group of people, how to have a boss, how to deliver day to day. These are starting places for people in our economy. In addition, there are a lot of people who are in school who use these jobs to help pay for school. And so whether it's you're getting started or you're just trying to fund your future, these first jobs really do matter.
Young people risk not just being held back, but being shut out. This spring, the labor force participation rate for people aged 16 to 24 dipped under 50% for the first time since the government began tracking monthly data in 1940. Jobs are disappearing that may never come back. Barkin points to a need for new skills.
We're going to have to be thinking about what are the careers that are going to be the substitutes for the entry-level, retail job or travel job, hospitality job. Normally if you worked at a restaurant and your restaurant closed, you'd probably get a job at another restaurant, or maybe you'd go get a job at the Gap. Today, the retailers are closed and the restaurants are closing and a lot of other local small businesses are closing. So I just think the natural next jobs, aren't as available as they would have otherwise been.
That next job question is really key, and the deeper you dig into the data, the more discouraging it looks. Torsten Slok is one of Wall Street's best-known strategists, leading the economics team at Deutsche Bank for more than a decade before recently becoming chief economist at Apollo Global Management. He sees some troubling trends developing.
Normally, people who are switching jobs, you see that wage growth in the data from the Fed shows that wage growth normally goes up for people who are switching jobs. But this time around, we're actually seeing wage growth go down, which probably is telling us that people are willing to take jobs at lower pay just to get into the labor market again. What makes this recession a little bit special is that the shock was so idiosyncratic, was so specialized in only some parts of the economy. What may help us this time around is that the recession in 2008, 2009 lasted about 18 months. Whereas this recession so far has only lasted roughly around 6 months. So the fact that this is a lot shorter, it may be that that will be more helpful. But the bottom line to your question is that if you graduate during a recession, it is always very challenging.
Economists call it scarring, the long-lasting consequences that a recession leaves on individuals, communities, and the economy as a whole. Scarring was significant for millennials who came of age during the Great Financial Crisis. I spoke with University of Michigan professor Betsy Stevenson about what's at stake for this generation of young workers. She was the Labor Department's chief economist under President Obama and is acclaimed for her work on the intersection between jobs, the modern family, and happiness.
What really matters is how long the recession lasts. It's the stagnation that they get even once they're employed, not getting raises, not getting promotions, not getting to climb the career ladder. And so if you have a long, prolonged recession with a long recovery, then it can take a very long time for them to get back to where they otherwise would have been. Look, I think there's already some damage to young people that's going to take them a decade to reverse. So I think of that already as some permanent scarring. You know, can it get worse? Absolutely. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will get.
Coming up, people in their 20s are on the move, moving back in with their parents, that is, at a record rate. And even though young workers have more technical savvy than their elders, it may not always work to their advantage.
They're up against employers who are going to be reluctant to try new things, and employers who are going to be reluctant to hire new people, and frankly, employers who just have seen their revenues plummet.
This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to a Bloomberg special report, Generation Interrupted. I'm Lisa Abramowicz. What happens to generations that come of age during a downturn? Studies show they often have lower long-term earnings potential and tend to save more. This may be even more likely during the upcoming decade when growth was expected to slow even before the pandemic hit. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that the economy will add only 6 million jobs from 2019 to 2029, an annual growth rate of only 0.4%. That compares with a 1.3% annual job growth in the previous decade in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. Tom Barkin and Betsy Stevenson both told me this is the worst possible time for careers to stall.
Our research team says that most of life outcomes in terms of wealth, you know, the biggest driver is where you sit at age 23. And so if we can't get folks into the workforce, into school, paying for school with their jobs in the workforce by age 23, I think there's a real threat to what's going to happen to these folks throughout their career.
Whenever we have a recession, the kids who are graduating from high school or college right around that time do face really significant labor market pains that can last a decade. For young people, the way you climb up and build your career is you get a lot of movement in your 20s. You know, you change jobs, you get promotions, and that's also missing. The people graduating from college into this pandemic, they're really getting hammered. And that's because they would normally think, I just spent all this money on a college degree and I should go into, you know, an entry-level job that's going to let me climb up the career ladder, and I should be earning a pretty good wage by the time I'm 30. And that's exactly the path that gets disrupted.
Here's another statistic that speaks to shrinking horizons for young people. A Pew Research survey finds that a majority of U.S. 18 to 29-year-olds are now living with their parents for the first time since the end of the Great Depression. Betsy Stevenson says the pandemic didn't cause this trend, but it sped up a process that was already in motion.
We are definitely seeing people, postponing having kids. They're postponing getting married. And we saw in the 2008 recession, lots of kids moving in with their parents. Is this just the pandemic? No, it's absolutely not. This is like a trend we've been seeing as kids spend more time at home. Young adults spend more time at home. They stay on their parents' health insurance because they're not getting health insurance in their jobs when they're young. They stay in their parents' house so that they can save up because housing is expensive. And they wait until they're in their late 20s or 30s, to have a child. So that delay is definitely a longer run pattern.
We're in a new era where people aren't going to the office and you're not necessarily interacting with your boss. Do you have any sense of whether that will set people back who are entering the workforce now, or whether it will give them an upper hand if they're more savvy technologically?
That sounds like a great way to be optimistic, that young people do have a set of skills that will help them navigate our current situation. It's also the case that younger people tend to be more flexible in their thinking and willing to do things differently. That could certainly help them in our current situation. But, they're up against, employers who are, who are going to be reluctant to try new things, and employers who are going to be reluctant to hire new people. And frankly, employers who just have seen their revenues plummet. And, when they lay workers off, sometimes those young workers are the first to go.
This recession has also accelerated a dramatic shakeup of the types of jobs available. Jobs exist, but many newly jobless adults don't have the skills to fill them. The key to recovery will be bridging this widening gap, but Tom Barkin thinks companies will step up to retrain workers because it benefits their bottom line. He's proposing to foster partnerships between businesses and community colleges.
I talked to an aircraft maintenance shop that has a partnership with a community college because they need a very specific set of skills. And it pays out for them to put, if you will, their recruiting dollars into that investment. Similarly, a pharmaceutical manufacturer with a different community college, it just makes sense for them to invest to get the talent. And so I think this is actually win-win. It doesn't have to be, thought of as a big funding mechanism, because I think we have people who need jobs and we have people who need employees.
I know that you have kids who fit within this cohort. What would your recommendation be to someone in this age group who is looking to retrain themselves in some capacity? What skills are most in demand right now that could give them the best chance?
Well, there's certainly, to the extent you have an interest and affinity for technology, those skills are very much in demand, and certainly everything looks like that will continue to be in demand. I'd also say skilled trades, anything around working around the house, fixing cars, any of those, if you have that kind of affinity, that's another place that for sure we have needs now, and I think we will in the future. And then the third place I'd point to is healthcare. Certainly this pandemic has pointed that out. Home health is a great example of a place that's likely to grow as nursing homes have challenged. So getting into those fields as well. Maybe you also get a sense, and now I'm going to get into my kids for a second, you got to figure out what you like doing. I think it's very hard to predict what the jobs of 20 or 30 or 40 years out are going to be, but I think you can figure out what it is that you like doing. I think find a place that fits that. And so I think this notion of trying to find fit for purpose is one I would encourage. And kids, I hope you're listening.
One place where young people have traditionally found skills and purpose is higher education. But Generation Interrupted is questioning that route, and perhaps with good reason.
Many have delayed college entry simply because of all the challenges that many colleges are experiencing at the moment.
This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to a Bloomberg special report, Generation Interrupted. I'm Lisa Abramowicz. More than 21 million Americans lost their jobs in March and April, the sharpest and fastest employment decline in history. Hiring has begun to rebound, but for younger workers, the outlook is still challenging. Judd Kolko is chief economist at Indeed, the world's largest online job site. He gave me some detail on the hiring landscape as of mid-September.
We see in terms of job postings that they're down almost 20% compared to where they were last year, especially in a lot of the sectors where young people, especially young graduates, often look for their first jobs. Job postings are down more than 30% in tech and finance. They're also down significantly in jobs like marketing and accounting. The sectors where hiring has been very strong are goods-related sectors: construction, driving, retail, warehouse jobs. These are sectors that are doing well because they support the stay-at-home economy, but they tend to hire fewer college grads, and they don't tend to be the sectors that young college grads look at first.
And they also typically pay less, right?
And the sectors that are hiring right now, for the most part, are jobs that pay less. We've seen much slower recovery in job postings in higher wage sectors, partly because those higher wage sectors are, on the one hand, slower to lay people off, but also in times of uncertainty, they're slower to hire.
At least for now, young people with some post-high school education are still more likely to be employed than those without. Cheryl Brooks of the University of Massachusetts told me what she's seen in the months since the pandemic hit.
Obviously, there's the hiring landscape has been very different this year in terms of both full-time positions, but also in terms of internships. Certain sectors have been harder hit than others. Hotel, restaurant management, for example, sports management, the performing arts. Other sectors have been doing quite well. K through 12 education, actually, they're looking to hire that we're in flux on that. So healthcare, obviously, human services. In addition, we're seeing a big boost in just the last couple of weeks in internships and co-ops, what we call field experience. Employers do realize that they need to continue to look at future hiring and to keep creating that pool of candidates for the pipeline for the future.
Still, as this new and unusual academic year begins, it's clear that many members of Generation Z are rethinking their educational plans. Harvard University announced that enrollment has dropped nearly 20% from a year ago. Princeton reported a 12% year-over-year decline. Overall, according to a survey by the National Student Clearinghouse, fall undergraduate enrollment at U.S. colleges is tracking about 2.5% down from last year. Although enrollment in graduate programs has increased by about 4%, I asked Torsten Slok if he thinks the fundamental value proposition of higher education has shifted downward.
I do think that it will always be a good idea to get more education. There's both a signaling device in terms of applying for jobs, but also what you learn, of course, is very important as a framework for whatever it is that you're doing. And as we know, a lot of educations have, of course, become more specialized. So in that sense, it is helpful, and it will always be helpful to have more education. But to your point, it has gotten more expensive. We have seen tuition costs come down in the CPI data more recently, but generally speaking, of course, what is somewhat unusual, exactly as you highlighted, is that this time around, we haven't seen college enrollment go up. And that probably also has to do with the fact that many have delayed college entry simply because of all the challenges that many colleges are experiencing at the moment.
Those challenges include convincing students to embrace online instruction in place of in-person classes, and persuading them that the credential that they get today will earn them the jobs of tomorrow. The Bureau of Labor Statistics published a list of the fastest growing occupations for the coming decade, and healthcare dominates the top of the lineup. Colleges must decide how to retool their curriculum to meet this anticipated demand. One college that's not seeing enrollment fall off is Howard University, a historically Black institution in Washington, D.C. Howard's president, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, believes the school benefits from a uniquely relevant profile in a year notable for intense social activism and accelerated medical research.
Since the 2016 election, political science has risen to the top of the heap as one of the most sought after majors at our university. And that is very telling. Biology was always one of our top major in terms of enrollment, and pre-med interest is also beginning to peak. Our enrollment is up 16%, primarily because our retention rate also went up as well. So what we've seen is Howard students, at least, have made a decision that they want to pursue higher education in this downtime.
Applications are also surging at elite business schools. Stanford's Graduate School of Business just welcomed the largest incoming MBA class in its history. Dean Jonathan Levin says it's too early to tell whether students are entering with different expectations or aspirations as a result of the coronavirus crisis, but it's certainly a presence he can't ignore.
I'm an economist by background. I'm very worried about the economic impacts of the pandemic. I think the impacts have been quite bifurcated and different across different parts of the economy. My former Stanford colleague, Raj Chetty, who has done a lot of work to study the pandemic economic impacts in real time, has noted that the recession has more or less ended for workers at higher income levels in jobs that shift easily to remote work, and is being felt, most powerfully for workers who are in person in the service economy. Our students at Stanford are in the fortunate category of being able to go out into the sector of the economy that still has strong opportunities.
Generation interrupted is also a generation divided. Some of those divisions are apparent now in this uneven recovery. Some may only show up years from now. I asked Betsy Stevenson which of the many disruptions of 2020 she thinks will leave the most permanent mark on this generation.
For me, that's not the kids trying to enter the labor market right now. It's the kids trying to struggle through Zoom school. And, I think that we're not paying enough attention to the harm that is happening among those kids. It's not just their education that's being disrupted, their hard skills. Are they going to be able to do as much math? Are they going to be able to read as well? Are they going to, have the science knowledge and the technology knowledge to thrive in the workplace? They also need the sort of social emotional skills that get developed in, your standard K through 12 classroom, but even your college classroom. A lot of growing up in college is about those connections you make with your classmates late at night, debating issues, trying to figure out how you're going to see the world. All these things are interrupted for young people. And I don't think that we're paying enough attention to what it's going to take to make it up to those young people so that when they hit their 20s and their 30s, they're as good to go as previous generations were at maximizing their potential.
Every generation has its challenges, but the road ahead for this one looks especially difficult. How it rises to the occasion will define its legacy and also the shape of the broader economy for years to come. That wraps up our special report, Generation Interrupted. Stay tuned to Bloomberg Television and Radio for ongoing coverage, and visit Bloomberg.com for all the latest business news and analysis 24 hours a day. Stay safe, everyone. I'm Lisa Abramowicz, and this is Bloomberg.